Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into something we all know, grief.
Yeah,
It's universal, right?
it is.
We all experience loss. But what happens when grief doesn't fade?
Mm,
What if it lingers for years?
yeah.
Impacts your life in ways you never expected? That's where prolonged grief disorder, or PGD, comes in. It's a relatively new diagnosis, and it's shedding light on a really tough experience that millions of people face.
Yeah, it is a new diagnosis, and it helps us understand that PGD isn't just about being sad
Right.
or taking a long time to get over it.
Yeah.
It's a distinct condition with very specific features.
Okay, so let's break this down.
Yeah,
What exactly are we talking about when we say prolonged grief disorder?
right.
How is it different from just feeling really, really sad after a loss?
Think of it this way. It's been over a year since you lost someone incredibly important to you, but instead of the intensity of the grief lessening, it feels like it just happened yesterday.
Wow.
These constant thoughts about the loss, they're not just memories. They intrude on your daily life, affecting work, relationships, everything. It's like a part of you is missing, and you can't quite figure out who you are or what your purpose is without that person in your life.
It's almost like feeling like a ghost yourself, constantly haunted by the loss. And you mentioned identity being disrupted. What does that actually look like for someone dealing with PGD?
It can manifest in different ways. For some, their whole sense of self was intertwined with the person they lost. Maybe they were a caregiver for years, and now that role is gone, leaving them feeling lost and unsure of their place in the world. Others might have had their future plans tied to the person who died, and now those dreams feel shattered, leaving them with a sense of emptiness and lack of direction.
So it's not just the emotional pain, but a real shakeup in how they see themselves and their place in the world. And this isn't just a small number of people, right? How common is PGD actually?
It's more prevalent than you might think. Studies suggest that anywhere from 5 to 15% of people who experience a loss will develop PGD. That could be millions of people silently struggling with this condition.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is.
It really makes you realize that you probably know someone who might be dealing with this, or maybe you've even experienced elements of it yourself after a loss.
Yeah.
And we've touched on the emotional impact, but what about the consequences?
Right.
What happens if PGD is left untreated?
Well, the emotional toll is heavy enough, but PGD doesn't stop there. It's like this chronic stress that eats away at your body's defenses over time. We're seeing links to all sorts of physical health problems, sleep disturbances, increased substance use, weakened immune systems, even a higher risk of heart disease and some types of cancer.
Hold on, cancer?
Yeah,
That's a serious connection.
it is.
How does that work?
It's still being researched, but chronic stress plays a huge role in our overall health. And PGD, with its constant state of heightened anxiety and emotional distress, puts a tremendous strain on the body. Over time, this can weaken the immune system and potentially contribute to the development of various health issues, including some cancers.
That's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the impact on mental health as well. You mentioned earlier that people with PGD are at a higher risk for suicide. Can you elaborate on that?
It's a heartbreaking reality, but studies show that a significant percentage of individuals with PGD experience suicidal thoughts. The statistics are alarming. Up to 65% have thoughts of wanting to die, 38% engage in self-destructive behaviors, and tragically, about 9% attempt suicide.
That's a huge difference compared to people who experience what we might consider normal grief.
Yeah.
So it's clear that PGD is a serious condition with potentially devastating consequences.
Right.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about what makes someone more vulnerable to developing PGD. Are there certain factors that increase the risk?
Absolutely. One major factor is the type of loss experienced. The death of a child or a romantic partner, for instance, tends to carry a higher risk of PGD than other types of loss.
I can see that. Losing a child or your partner, it's like a part of your world is suddenly gone. It makes sense that those losses would hit harder and make it more difficult to adjust.
Exactly. And the circumstances surrounding the death matter as well. Sudden, unexpected, or violent losses like those from suicide, accidents, or murders can be particularly difficult to process. They can leave people feeling shocked, traumatized, and struggling to make sense of what happened, which increases the risk of developing PGD.
Like the suddenness of the loss doesn't allow for any preparation or gradual adjustment. It just hits you out of nowhere.
Exactly. And then there are personal factors at play. A history of mental health issues like mood or anxiety disorders, or a past experience with substance abuse can make someone more susceptible to developing PGD.
So there's a kind of vulnerability that already exists.
Right. And we can't underestimate the impact of early life trauma. individuals who experienced the loss of a parent during childhood or faced abuse early on might be more prone to developing PGD later in life. Those early experiences can create a sense of vulnerability and difficulty coping with loss that can resurface later on.
It's fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. It speaks to the long-lasting impact of those early experiences. I remember reading a study about how the location of a loved one's death seemed to play a role in the development of PGD as well.
You're probably thinking of the study about caregivers of cancer patients. It found that caregivers whose loved ones died in the hospital were significantly more likely to develop PGD compared to those whose loved ones died at home with hospice care.
That's the one. The researchers thought the hospital environment, with all the medical interventions and sometimes limited emotional support, might contribute to feelings of helplessness and unresolved grief. Whereas being at home, surrounded by loved ones and receiving palliative care, allows for a more peaceful and emotionally supported dying process.
It's a good illustration of how the environment surrounding the death can have a significant impact on the grieving process. And speaking of research, there was another study that looked at widowed individuals. It found that a whopping 43% of those who had also lost a parent in childhood developed PGD after their spouse's death, compared to only 13% who hadn't experienced such an early loss.
That's a powerful statistic. It really highlights how past losses, especially those experienced early in life, can resurface and complicate grief reactions later on. So we're talking about a complex interplay of factors: the nature of the loss itself, the individual's personal history, and the environment in which the loss occurs, all contributing to the likelihood of developing PGD. But here's the big question. Is there hope for people struggling with this condition?
Yeah.
Can PGD be treated?
Yes, absolutely. While PGD is a serious condition, it is treatable.
Okay.
There's growing evidence that certain therapies can be very effective in helping people recover and rebuild their lives.
That's great to hear. What kind of therapies are showing promise?
One of the most promising approaches is a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and exposure therapy.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. Can you break down what these therapies involve and how they actually help someone with PGD?
Of course. CBT focuses on identifying and changing those unhelpful thoughts and behaviors that are fueling the prolonged grief.
Okay.
It helps people challenge those negative thought patterns and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Now, the exposure therapy part might sound intimidating, but it's a gradual and controlled process.
I can imagine it being quite emotionally challenging.
It can be, but it's done with a lot of care and support. It involves gradually re-exposing the individual to memories and reminders of the loss in a safe and therapeutic setting. The idea is that by confronting those difficult emotions head-on, they can begin to process them more effectively and reduce their intensity over time.
So it's kind of like facing your fears, but in a controlled environment where you have the tools and support to manage the emotional impact. And you said this combination therapy is more effective than just CBT alone.
That's right. Studies have shown that combining CBT and exposure therapy leads to significantly better outcomes for people with PGD. And there are other promising treatment options as well. Dr. Catherine Shear at Columbia University has developed a 16-session therapy protocol that incorporates elements of CBT, but also draws from other approaches.
What's unique about Dr. Shear's protocol? What does it focus on?
It's a really interesting approach. Dr. Shear's protocol not only addresses the cognitive and emotional aspects of grief, but also goes a step further by helping people find a renewed sense of meaning and purpose in their lives.
So it's not just about processing the pain of the loss, but also about rebuilding a life that feels fulfilling, even in the absence of the person they loved.
That's exactly it. It might involve helping the individual set new personal goals, re-engage with activities they once enjoyed, or even find ways to honor the memory of their loved one in a way that feels personally meaningful.
It sounds like it's about integrating the loss into their life story rather than letting it completely define them.
I like that. It's about finding a new path forward, carrying the memory of their loved one with them, but not letting it hold them back from living a full life. And we can't underestimate the importance of social support in all of this. Having a strong network of friends, family, or even a support group can be incredibly powerful in navigating the challenges of PGD.
That human connection, that feeling of belonging, can really make a difference, can't it? Knowing you're not alone in this experience.
Absolutely. And there are even some exciting developments in the world of online therapy. Researchers are exploring internet-based programs that could provide support and guidance to people at risk of developing PGD right after a loss occurs. This could be huge in terms of accessibility and early intervention, especially for those who might not have access to traditional therapy.
That's incredible. Imagine having these resources readily available online. It could really reach people in a way that we haven't been able to before. What about medication? Are there any medications specifically for PGD?
It's still early days, but researchers are looking into it. There are some interesting neurological similarities between PGD and addiction.
Oh.
Both involve this intense yearning or craving.
Hmm.
So there's been some exploration into using naltrexone and the medication typically used to treat addiction as a potential treatment for PGD.
So the idea is that because PGD can involve this intense yearning for the person who died, similar to the cravings experienced in addiction, a medication that targets those reward pathways in the brain might be helpful.
Precisely. But it's important to remember that more research is needed to really determine how effective naltrexone is for PGD specifically. It's not a magic bullet. It's still crucial to focus on those therapeutic approaches that address the underlying emotional and psychological aspects of PGD.
It sounds like there's a lot of hope for people dealing with PGD, but it's not a quick fix. It's a journey that takes time and commitment to therapy and building a support system.
Exactly. It's important to remember that recovery from PGD is a process. It's like any other form of healing. It takes time, patience, and the right support. But with the right approach, people can heal and find a way to move forward in a way that honors their loss while also embracing the possibilities for the future.
You know, as we've been talking about all this, I keep thinking about how much emphasis there is on the individual nature of grief. There's no one-size-fits-all timeline or experience. What might be considered normal grief for one person could be completely different for someone else.
Absolutely. Grief is a deeply personal journey, and that's why the diagnosis of PGD is so important. It recognizes that for some people, grief can become a serious condition that needs specialized care. It helps us move away from judging people's grief reactions and instead offer them the support they truly need.
It's about validating their experience, saying, hey, what you're going through is real. It has a name, and you're not alone.
Exactly. And that validation can be incredibly empowering. It can give people the courage to reach out for help and start their journey towards healing.
We've been focusing on individual grief, one person coping with a loss. But I'm curious, what about the collective grief that societies experience, especially after large-scale tragedies like the COVID-19 pandemic?
That's a really important question. Collective grief is complex, and it impacts us on a much broader level. Think about the shared sense of loss and mourning we saw during the pandemic, or in response to wars and natural disasters that impact entire communities, even entire nations. It's a shared experience of loss that connects us in profound ways.
It's like this ripple effect that goes beyond individual experiences and touches entire communities, even entire countries.
Exactly. And understanding how collective grief works, how it impacts both individuals and societies as a whole, is crucial. It can inform how we respond to these events, how we provide support, and how we build resilience on a larger scale.
It makes me think about the importance of rituals and memorials in processing collective grief. Those shared experiences of mourning can really help bring communities together and offer a sense of solace and shared understanding.
That's a great point. Rituals and memorials provide a space to collectively acknowledge the loss, honor those we've lost, and find comfort in shared experience. It's a way of processing grief together as a community.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into prolonged grief disorder, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember? What's the message you want to leave them with?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that PGD is a real and treatable condition. It's not a weakness, and it's not something people can simply snap out of. It's a disorder that deserves attention, understanding, and support.
And early identification is crucial, right? The sooner someone recognizes the signs of PGD and seeks help, the better their chances of recovery.
Absolutely. And it's important for friends, family, and loved ones to be aware of the signs as well. They can play a vital role in encouraging individuals to seek professional help. We've talked about the effectiveness of therapies like CBT and exposure therapy, as well as Dr. Shear's 16-session protocol. These approaches offer real hope for people struggling with PGD.
Right. And while medication isn't the primary treatment for PGD, research into options like naltrexone is ongoing. Who knows what the future holds for treatment options? But right now, we know that therapy and social support are key.
Absolutely. Human connection is essential to healing. Having a network of people you can lean on can make all the difference.
You know, throughout this deep dive, one of the things that has really stuck with me is this idea that grief, in all its forms, is a part of what makes us human. It's not something to be feared or avoided.
I completely agree. Grief is a natural response to loss. And while PGD represents a more complex and prolonged form of grief, It's still rooted in our capacity for love and connection.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where the real hope lies. Even in the face of profound loss and the challenges of PGD, our capacity for love and connection can be a source of strength and resilience.
It's about finding a way to honor the love that was lost while also finding a way to keep living and loving, even if it looks different than before. And that's a message I hope our listeners will carry with them.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. We've explored the complexities of grief, learned about the challenges of PGD, and discovered the potential for healing and growth even in the face of profound loss. It really has been. And for our listeners, if you or someone you know is grappling with prolonged grief, please know that you're not alone. There is help, there is hope, and it's okay to reach out for support. We'll include some resources in the show notes to get you started.
And as we wrap up, I think it's important to circle back to something we touched on earlier. The idea of collective grief, especially in the wake of events like the pandemic,
Right.
makes you wonder, how does experiencing such widespread loss on a societal level impact individual experiences of PGD? Does it make people more susceptible? Does it change the way we perceive and cope with personal loss?
That's such a fascinating question. I mean, we've been focused on PGD and individuals, but zooming out to the bigger picture, it feels like there's a whole other layer to explore there.
Yeah.
How does a society collectively grieve, and how does that impact mental health on such a large scale?
Exactly. It makes you think about the ripple effects. If we're all carrying this weight of collective grief, how does that influence individual experiences of loss and the potential for developing PGD? Does it make us more vulnerable? Does it change our understanding of what's normal when it comes to grieving? These are questions that researchers are just beginning to delve into. And the answers could have profound implications for how we approach mental health support in the wake of large-scale tragedies.
It's almost like we need to redefine our understanding of grief, not just as an individual experience, but as something that can permeate our communities and shape our collective consciousness.
It's a complex and nuanced topic, but I think by acknowledging the interplay between individual and collective grief, we can start to develop more comprehensive and compassionate approaches to healing and supporting one another in times of loss.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. From the very personal struggles of PGD to the broader implications of collective grief, it's clear that understanding grief in all its complexities is crucial to building a more compassionate and supportive world.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a truly insightful conversation, and I hope our listeners have gained a deeper understanding of the challenges and possibilities that surround grief and healing.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, take care and be well.